Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much, first of all, for tuning in to another Love Your Neighbor Sunday community partner conversation, where we're wanting to be intentional about just using this time and space on Love Your Neighbor Sunday, not just to go out and find ways to love and serve our neighbors in very real and practical ways, but also just to use this space to be intentional about taking on a posture of listening and learning, so that God might continue to expand and broaden our imagination and understanding of what it means to love our neighbor well. And so we have been so privileged to have some really great conversations, different community organizations, as well as individuals who are on the ground, on the front lines, so to speak, loving and serving their communities in very real and tangible ways on a day-to-day regular basis, even as we find ourselves still in this pandemic. And so today I'm just super excited for the opportunity to introduce you to our very special guests this morning, Judith Cho and Laura Benton. Judith and Laura, who in a moment are going to have a chance to share more about the organization. But in a quick nutshell, they are the co-founders of Unity Collective Counseling, which is an incredible local nonprofit based here in Seattle, Washington, that is working to transform individuals, relationships, and communities through embodied, intersectional, integrative, and holistic care. And so, Judith and Laura, thank you so much for just taking time out of your schedules to be with us today. We're excited to have this conversation with you, to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing at Unity Collective Counseling, and how you see the work that you do really as a very important part of your faith, and how you understand what it means to love your neighbor well. So thank you again to the both of you for just taking time and being a part of this conversation. So maybe should we just jump right in to some of these questions? I know there's so much ground that we could cover in our limited time. So maybe just as a jump off point, maybe you could start off by just giving us a brief overview of the organization. I know sometimes that's hard to do. There's so much you could say about the organization, but maybe just a high level brief overview. What is Unity Collective Counseling? What does your organization do? Who do you serve? Maybe we could start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Pastor Royce. We are so excited to be here. Hi, Common Good. We've heard so much about y'all, and we have a particularly special relationship with one of your own, Dr. Kelly Mark. And yeah, we are grateful for spaces like these where we can connect with the local church, because that's a big part of Unity Collective's vision and purpose. So like Pastor Royce, like you said, we are a local nonprofit focused on mental health and the intersections of mental health with faith in particular, and with other identities and topics and issues such as bridging the gap between our racial and cultural, spiritual and ethnic identities, and how that forms how we move about the world, how we do relationships, and how we are in community as well. And we are a collective of therapists, of professionals who are faith-based and who are passionate about bringing our skills to those spaces that could really use just some care and support. And we do that by providing therapy, for one. So we're a counseling center. We also do that by training up the next generation of therapists. So we are a trainee center for interns. We provide professional training for the wider therapy community that's intersectional and faith-based. And we also work to serve the community through workshops, through groups, classes, and partnerships with churches and other organizations.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for that. Maybe, for those that might not be as familiar with the world of counseling or the work that a therapist does, maybe can you expand a little bit, either one of you maybe expound a little bit on that in terms of, what does that work look like? What is that field? What is that industry?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about mental health, I mean, it's such a common phrase that people are using, especially now, I mean, these last few years. So really, we want to even back up and kind of define what we mean as a collective and as an organization. What we mean by mental health is really the ways in which our spiritual health, our physiological health, our emotional health, and our relational health are held together and are able to function in their kind of highest capacity in the way we're designed and made. So when we're talking about the work of counseling, we're tending to each of those aspects of who we are as humans. And of course that there's a lot of nuances even within that, but I think it helps to just kind of understand what that means, because I think we have associations with, we understand sometimes what mental illness looks like in our community, but sometimes we don't know what mental health is. Health in each of those areas and are laboring in each of those areas to be whole and healed people. So when we think about counseling and the work that we do, it is a kind of relationship. And I think I'll kind of work backwards from a glimpse of what happens in our offices. So we're usually in office spaces, meeting with either individuals or couples or families, folks who are younger, folks who are older, folks who are from all different backgrounds. And in that space, we get to witness the transformation of people when they're able to have burdens lifted, and when they're able to have hindrances removed through the power of relationship. And as we think about relationship with God, with another person, and with other people in a community, and a relationship really with ourselves. And as an individual or as a person in a community. And so I start there in saying that the work that we get to do is just to witness that transformation. And it is powerful. I've done this for some number of years, some decades, and I still can't believe the privilege that it is to get to watch that transformation. But if I back up, that's kind of the end. And there's just the ripple effect of that that total transformation. People just say, I can't believe the aspects of my life that have changed because I've experienced healing. There's small things and big things that I never anticipated were connected. And yet I just feel this thriving in so many areas. So the ripple effect is powerful. And that's part of why we do this work. We see one person or a couple or a family with an eye for and a vision for a whole community that's transformed by a number of healed folks being in relationship and on mission and serving the Lord in fullness. So as I back up, what happens in that process, just to demystify it for folks who don't know, because I think it can feel kind of scary. It has a bad rap, scary things in movies about therapists and people laying on couches and stuff like that. Like it's kind of normal. It's kind of like a living room, but what we're doing is, again, we're exploring the whole kind of system that folks belong to and really trying to bring insight and understanding into how life experiences have affected our everyday functioning, again, mentally, physiologically, neurologically, relationally, emotionally. Sometimes emotions have too much power, or sometimes they have too little power in our lives. Sometimes relationships are divided, and sometimes they're, too close for there to be health. And so we're just kind of going through each of those areas and really trying to bring things to light and put words to our experiences together in relationship. That's how we understand some of the ways in which transformation happens. We pay attention to our bodies and the signals that our bodies are sending, and just pay attention to care for those systems in our bodies. And then we work towards increased capacity to reconcile relationships through health. And if I back up one step further, that's what happens some version of what happens in our offices in these conversations. But even before that, if I think about kind of the origins of this work or how therapy kind of came to be, I don't know how many hundreds of years ago, whatever, it was pretty Eurocentric. It was pretty male. It had some power dynamics, and it was pretty individualistic. And it was just kind of built on that foundation as a field. And so some of what we try to do as an organization or as ourselves kind of called to the ministry of this work of counseling is just contextualize and change that. That's some of what gives it a bad, sometimes, that kind of not normalized, kind of some of the barriers to therapy are that it was too much of those things in its original form.
Got it.
But what we're trying to do is be a body of people that are doing something different. And that is relational and holistic and tends to those aspects of power and otherwise that just mean we're doing relationship in a unique kind of way. And the uniqueness of therapy is really the quietness, just being away from everyday life and talking through some of those experiences and what's happening can give you capacity for insight because it's just a different kind of space. So
Yeah.
a little bit of what we do.
That's really great. That's super helpful. And I love just the emphasis on kind of relationship. And it seems like that ties in with even the name of unity, the unity collective, right? This collective notion. I love to, and you kind of touched a little bit on maybe some of the unique things about, your particular offering. Before we even maybe delve into that a little bit more, I think it'd be awesome for our listeners just to hear a little bit of the journey, right? You both are therapists, you have your own practices, but yet you chose to start this other thing. And so, maybe you could share a little bit of kind of just that story and kind of what was the impetus or the motivation to wanting to put together this collective.
I'll jump in on this one again to give a little bit of the history, and then Judith will fill in some other spaces. But really, our this work is an act of obedience for us. We felt like God gave us a call to not only gain the skills of counseling, but to really embody the heart of kind of pastoral ministry in another space. And as we talk to other therapists who are believers, there are a number of other folks too that, in their early days started to think about, should I go into ministry? Am I into family ministry? And kind of tracked this way where it became therapeutic and clinical. But really, we have hearts for the health and thriving of the church. And so this was a way to create a channel for ourselves and for other clinicians to serve the church, to be a part of building and rebuilding those relationships there, serving pastoral leadership, just really to be both in our offices and doing that amazing work that I described, but also come out of our offices and do something bigger together that impacts the whole family. And initially, I felt like God was giving a vision back in 2016, in the winter of 2016. So it's been a while, but just started as a thought, a kind of what if, what if the family of God is hurting? And again, this was 2016 before what's been made visible in the pain of the body of Christ. It's not new, but it came to the surface more readily. What would happen if the body of Christ and the family of God were hurting, and the people that I've trained and called to cultivate the skills of healing and helping families and whole systems find greater health? What if those folks came together and could do some work? So this is in response to that, and being good stewards of the training we have and the, again, just the call. It's a little bit, sometimes people ask, like, how could you just sit with people all day who are hurting and struggling? Like, how does that not wear you out? But I think, and sometimes we ask ourselves, what am I doing? This is hard. But a lot of other days, it's like, it's just such a privilege. And so we're called to sit in those spaces. And so we're just stewarding that capacity to be with people in pain and struggle and in healing. And really also finally, just the, I'm kind of inspired by some early missionaries, some early risk takers in the family of God from centuries ago who really did a lot of things in their life just to reveal the glory of God. Like, we have these gifts, and what if we just offered them to God and just said, you know what, God, do something that only you could do with us, because there's nothing special about us. There's nothing different about us. We're just willing to take risks and take steps of faith and just let God show up. And then we just get to point back to God and be like, but that was not us, because we don't have that in us, but here's the work. So just as an example and an encouragement to the body of Christ, like step into those steps of faith with whatever gifts we've been given.
That's so good. I love that.
Yeah. And I think what I'll add to that too is like we both had separate hearts for, the church and how we can widen really the gift of, you can say, counseling or psychology. And for myself, growing up in a multi-generational Korean immigrant church, I think what drew me to this field was seeing just the dynamics there, right? That could really, really benefit from some more tools and education. And I think that really aligns for me when we think about why Unity Collective in addition to our practices. We are so grateful for the individual work we get to do or seeing couples or families. But really, when we think about the church too, it's like a larger system. It's like kind of like a larger family. And there are pastors such as yourselves and leaders, congregation members who work super hard to, bring about unity, be disciples. And there's also this like other piece that we have some insight on that we want to come alongside of those working to promote, the flourishing that Laura is talking about. So yeah, that's part of why we do what we do.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. No, it's so great. And you both touched on this in kind of the sharing of the journey and the story. And Laura, you also touched on this too when you were talking about kind of the history of counseling therapy. But I'd love for you all to maybe just expound a little bit on like what makes Unity Collective Counseling unique. What are some of those gaps or those needs that you were seeing in your space, in your field, that you feel like, hey, this is kind of the unique flavor that we're bringing to the table? And I know you touched on things like the integration of faith and church and, seeing some of those things. But yeah, are there some other things that you feel like, hey, these are really, when we kind of think about the vision of Unity Collective Counseling, like this is really what we're trying to do that we feel like is the needs are not currently being met?
Yeah, for sure. What I love about Unity and the opportunity to be a part of this group is that the intentionality around intersectionality. We talked about faith, right? We come from that identity, but also like, especially in Seattle or the Pacific Northwest, there may be there may be practices out there or groups out there that identify faith-based organizations that are practicing counseling. There may be groups that are people of collectives of color who practice, but there weren't a lot of orgs that are faith-based, but also very much about who we are in all of our identities, right? And particularly elevating, highlighting the stories, the experiences, the knowledge, expertise of people of color, of BIPOC individuals. And so one of the things that I think makes Unity really unique and what I'm really proud of is that we have that focus in both our trainings and both who we have as part of the team, who's training us, who is on our leadership, who is on our board, because, obviously living in America, it's one thing, but also even when you narrow it down to our field of psychology, it is white dominant, historically, and in all the trainings we show up in. And so to have a space, not just for clinicians of color, to be able to be with other clinicians of color, but to be trained by clinicians of color is amazing. But also, like what I've been so encouraged by is then who comes to counseling, right? Like when we see the people who are coming through our doors, quote unquote, or our inboxes, I'm so excited to see more and more, especially, the Asian American community or people of color finding like Unity Collective has POC therapists, BIPOC therapists, and they're faith-based. Go check them out.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Laura, I'm sure there's other elements that I've missed, but anything else?
I feel like this question is open, like, what's great about us? There's a lot of things. We just love this space. I love our team. Yeah, I think what's, I don't know if this is, I think it's distinctive of us is that we're really built on this idea that really our work comes out of our capacity to be related and unified in our relationships as a team. And so we really labor for that. We labor to be diverse in a number of different ways, theologically, ethnically, otherwise, just all these aspects of ourselves, and to labor with those things still towards unity of purpose and practice and sharpening each other. So what's unique about us is the way we do relationship together. So hopefully that comes out in our work. We hope that is the case, that if you see one of our clinicians, you meet with one of our therapists, that you're getting a version of the whole team in the room with you, because we're trying to labor together.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I think we'd like to change our field also. This focus on training was a lot about particularly the lack of BIPOC clinicians. And again, what that means for accessibility or normalizing or people receiving services. So we're really intentional about who we're hoping to train and partner with to become part of the field and really change the landscape a little bit that way.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. Like, the vision for your organization is both the clients or the folks that you serve, but then also kind of this empowerment and training and raising up of other therapists, right, that can have access to these tools and resources. That's awesome. Judith, I think you mentioned the word intersectionality. And even when I was kind of browsing, the website, I think that word intersectionality, kind of this integration idea, those two words definitely kind of stood out to me, as they seem like significant parts of kind of the work that you do and the specific work that you're trying to do at your organization. And we hear those words a lot in kind of other fields and other industries and spaces too. It'd be awesome if you could maybe just unpack those kind of two words a little bit. Like, what do they mean and how do they particularly play out in the field of psychology and the work that you do as therapists and counselors?
Well, we're trained in a particular way initially, way back in grad school, really from a systemic perspective, meaning that our understanding of health and thriving is that all parts of the system are functioning optimally. So all parts of the self, all parts of the body, all parts of the family come together in an integrated way. And when each of those parts is healthy, the whole is healthy. So we start from that kind of vision of health, of all parts of the whole coming together in health and thriving. And from that, we understand that, if you think about just the world around us and kind of everything we know about health, health requires a host. It has to be embodied somewhere, right? It's a plant, it's a tree, it's a human, it's right. Like it's in something. And so we understand that we're healthy or experiencing struggle in a body, and a body is in a place in time and a certain place in, geographical place, comes from a certain culture, right? Like there are all these things, health is embodied in a body, in a place, and that place in a period in history, and that all of where we are as people informs some of our identity formation, right? Some of who we are is reflected back to us, for better, for worse, from the culture around us, or from our community, or, from the different parts of the, our community that we're a part of, for better, for worse, right? There's good things in that reflection and some belonging. And then sometimes those are faulty messages that shapes an identity. And then that identity becomes a way that you engage with others, right? It becomes something that's embodied in relationships, and relationships then are embedded in communities. And you can see how that, health can be either thriving and brought to through each of those places, or otherwise struggle and pain and isolation. And a number of different ways of functioning can show up in that way. So when we think of intersection, we think of, or intersectionality, all of those aspects of identity and self and experience being part of the work. We're trying to not leave any part out. So again, we can have this thriving of all parts of us being redeemed and made whole and part of a whole thriving self and community and relationships. So that intersection is really about being aware and talking about and continually learning the ways in which each aspects of self and community and experiences and history and geography come into play in shaping who we are as humans. And again, not leaving any part of that out. And the integration piece, again, is another way to underscore bringing all aspects of ourselves. And that includes our spiritual selves. And that again was something that was kind of left out of therapy in its original form. It was kind of dissuaded and discouraged, but we absolutely believe that God is kind of the author of healing, and Spirit is counselor. And so we invite that thread of who we are as humans into the work too.
It's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm curious to know, and Laura, you talked about kind of this vision, this seed that was birthed in your mind, 2016, and everything since then that has transpired. Certainly the past 2.5 years, pandemic, the civil unrest, the social political climate that we find ourselves in, all these kind of huge things that are happening to us collectively. And then on top of that, obviously the individual unique experiences that people are kind of having to deal with on top of all those things. I'd imagine that, and I think both of you communicated, like even this idea of this notion of like mental health, mental wellness. Previously, there were a lot of spaces that these things weren't even talked about. But it's almost like the past couple of years, everyone's talking about mental health, mental wellness, and it's become such a big thing. What are you kind of seeing in terms of, the past couple of years, like the impact that it's had on folks, perhaps that you work with on an individual basis, but even those that are maybe coming through and leveraging and taking advantage of the services that you offer at Unity Collective Counseling? What are some of the unique challenges that you're seeing that people are facing? And what are some of the ways that you're trying to address that holistically?
Yeah, absolutely. These past few years have been something, to say the least. As therapists, we do have a unique position, where we kind of get a front row seat, and particularly witnessing sort of the progression, right? I would say first for BIPOC, people of color, BIPOC individuals, much of what happened in 2020, George Floyd, all that, like that's trauma and life experience that's been present throughout life. But I would say, particularly for maybe the Asian, the API community, that really started to come more and more into the focus with, the rise of Asian hate, COVID, of course, all of that. And so what I saw was, just like you were naming, like more and more conversations, more and more people wanting and willing to acknowledge sort of the intersections we're talking about of race, of identity, of culture, of racism, and its impact on our emotional and mental well-being. But not just that, not just this individual thing, right? But the collective kind of brokenness, hurt, pain that really has always been there, but has just come out in some really, really explicit ways, and there has been, I think, I've both appreciated as a mental health professional, the discourse, social media, all of that, that's like brought more and more attention to this. And so that's maybe normalized and validated folks seeking care for themselves, right? Especially like growing up, in an Asian context, right? Like therapy was not a thing that, right, was seen as okay, and so that's been really encouraging. But also the impact of our mental health collectively and individually has been real. We talk a lot about the pandemic and how tired we are, and how burnt out we are, the Great Resignation, all these things. But I was just reading a piece by Erna Kim Hackett. She writes, she's founder of Liberty Together, and she just wrote about recently the impact on Asian American women in 2021. And she was saying how, it's not that we're just exhausted, but we're changed. Mm-hmm. And that made me really think about yeah, we are all forever changed, right? We're not just tired where we'll one day sleep a lot and come out of this pandemic and be recovered.
Yeah.
And so how are we transformed? How are we disoriented? How are, right? The church, our relationships, our mental health. And so we've just been able to see people really starting to work on things that, we talked about integration that will bring about actually foundational joy, healing. People are searching for more meaning, purpose, reconciliation in their relationships, things that matter and have always mattered, but we've been maybe busy or whatever have you. But the past 2 years have really brought that to more to light.
I was thinking too, as you were talking, Judith, about again, as systems therapists, we have learned or have seen that the most kind of symptoms and distress come during times of transition and during times of change. So those are things that can stretch people, but also can reveal so many things that were buried or hidden, or we were just too busy to notice. So I think there has been a kind of revelation of some core things that have needed to come to the surface. And we've seen the kind of fear and distress that comes as people are transitioned by choice or not by choice in a season of life. And so, of course, that manifests in all kinds of ways, but it also is a necessary part of change and transformation. It usually is the beginning of kind of a great awakening, whether personally or in relationships or in a community. And so there's hope in that too, in these things coming to the surface. That's a big part of what we do in therapy, is try to make what's invisible visible, or what's unspoken spoken, or what's unseen seen. And I think that's some of what's been forced upon us in different ways in this season. So there's opportunity too.
What would you say would be in light of, these changes and that, we are all experiencing and seeing, what would be your hope for the church and for folks in the church in terms of kind of moving forward? Like, what would be your hope for how they think about kind of their mental and emotional wellness and health? And are there particular things that you would love to see even the church maybe doing a better job of in terms of ministering to their congregations and those that they serve, especially churches perhaps that predominantly made comprised of communities of color too?
Yeah, I think things like this, we value so much our relationships and our partnerships. And the one thing I forgot to mention about what's unique about us is that, we are about partnerships, and we are more than just therapy providers. We want to make mental health accessible, whether that's through groups or workshops or classes. But when we can partner with churches and pastors in particular who care about mental health, emotional and relational health, then that helps normalize, right, this work. Because essentially what it is like, bringing about improvements to your health and wellness and your relationships, right? For the flourishing of you, your family, your community, your church. And so when pastors can talk about even saying mental health, emotional health, relational health, therapy, counseling, I have a counselor, I do, right? Like that, I think is a wonderful thing to witness, the church normalizing it and speaking it out, right? That's something that has not been the norm, especially in the church spaces. And it's caused harm, silence, as we know, causes harm. And so it's created shame. We know a lot about shame, especially in Asian churches. And so I think our hope is to not only be that, like, we're here when churches are ready, but we want to see churches, just doing that together with us.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I know we're kind of coming up on our time, and maybe one last kind of question for folks that are perhaps listening, watching this, and perhaps they're coming to the realization for the first time that maybe they need help. How would someone get in touch with Unity Collective Counseling? What would that look like for folks who are interested to take advantage of the services that you offer?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just reach out to us. We have a website. We have an email. Our website is unitycollectivecounseling.org. Contact at Unity Collect. I'm sure you could probably provide that information. You can ask Kelly to connect us. And then just if you follow us too on social media, we'll put out our groups for workshops and classes. And then churches that want, we've had the privilege of providing like custom groups, right? Like we did a BIPOC trauma group for a church in Portland, right? Because they saw us and they reached out. So we are more than happy to connect and partner. But yeah, look us up, send us an email. That would be the way to get in touch with us.
Yeah. Awesome. Final thoughts is there anything else that you would love to or want to communicate to our community, just in terms of the work that you're doing, or any kind of final thoughts that you would want to share before we kind of wrap this up?
Well, I was just really impressed by the Common Good family, and really, I think it resonated so much just hearing different messages or different conversations that you've had, Pastor Royce, with people about really this focus on being the church in your local area. And we understand church as being just a web of relationships, and that's relationship with ourselves, with God, and with one another. And what we really want to see is thriving relationships, this thriving family, but not as an end in itself. Where, I think mental health, or this conversation, could be about just feeling good and feeling better and symptom alleviation and just not being burdened by things. And that is useful. And there is beauty and goodness in that. And also, if we're really about the kingdom of God, that serves a different end. And that's that you take your health and wholeness, you take your restoration, you take that, you work out your salvation in relationships, in your community, in your neighborhood, and in your family, of course, right? And in the church family. So we really also want to expand the vision for what health is really for, not just for feeling better, but for being empowered to then go and be and connect and do something to represent, what only God can do in the world. So we do want people to reach out, and we do want to be in service of churches for that end, not just to provide one more, just one more thing. But bigger vision in mind.
Yeah, I love that. And that's such a great kind of tie back into just even this conversation that we're having on Love Your Neighbor Sunday, at least within our community, right? This idea, this notion that we don't exist just for ourselves, but we exist for the common good, for the benefit and the flourishing of all people and all persons. But the only way that we can effectively serve, and it reminds me a little bit of, and I know we didn't really get a chance to talk about that one question about, the great command, right? To love God and to love neighbor as self, right? But even this notion of how do we actually love our neighbors and our communities well and others well, it requires that we actually love and care for ourselves. And so I love like that vision of like the work that you're doing to help people do that self-care work. But again, that's not the end all be all. It's so that we could actually fulfill the commandment to then love our neighbor well. And I so love your stories because you're modeling that, right? You're living into that reality of how then can we actually be on mission with God, and obviously doing the things that you're already doing with your individual practices, but then even having this grander, bigger vision now with Unity Collective Counseling. So thank you so much just for your story, for your journey, for your active really obedience and stewarding the gifts and the resources that God has imparted to each of you. It's such a blessing and encouragement. And I'm so looking forward to our church being able to journey alongside of you and supporting that work, and certainly participating in that work in whatever capacity that might look like. So thank you both again, Laura and Judith, for your time. Hey, for those that have tuned in and watched, I hope you're blessed. I hope you're encouraged. I hope you're challenged and inspired even to kind of take this as perhaps an invitation to consider even the unique gifts, passions, talents, resources that God has entrusted to you, and perhaps to ask these questions of how can you then, similar to what Judith and Laura have done, how can you take those things to use it for the greater good, and certainly to advance the kingdom of God. So God bless you all. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you soon.